I'm Lieutenant Colonel Katie Troy, 39, and I built my career from the ground up in the Air Force. Nothing handed to me, everything earned. For years, I backed my uncle, supported him, defended him, even when his ego got in the way. But when he tried to undercut my work and question my place in the very world I'd fought to earn a seat in, I made a decision that shifted everything. Have you ever been dismissed or undermined by someone you trusted? Someone you poured time and loyalty into? If you have, share your experience in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I break down what really happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a line after someone crossed one, hit that like button and subscribe. What unfolded next even I didn't see coming. I flew 27 combat missions before my uncle tried to sabotage my career. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there from the beginning, subtle at first, easy to dismiss as family tension or generational differences. But by the time I made captain, the pattern was unmistakable. My uncle, Thomas Troy, had decided that my success was a problem he needed to solve. It started innocently enough. I was a young Air Force captain, 03, putting in long hours at Langley, trying to prove myself worthy of the intelligence assignments I'd been chasing since my academy days. My uncle worked in D.C. as a mid-level civilian liaison, the kind of position that sounds important at cocktail parties, but doesn't actually involve much decision-making authority. He was proud of his proximity to power, always dropping names of senators he'd briefed or Pentagon officials he'd met in passing. When he introduced me to his colleagues, it was always with a qualifier. This is my niece Katie, she flies planes or something. Never my rank. Never my actual role. Just a vague dismissal that made my 4 years at the academy and 6 years of service sound like a hobby I'd picked up on weekends. I let it slide. Family dynamics are complicated, and I didn't want to be the one who made Thanksgiving dinner awkward by correcting him in front of his friends. Besides, I was too busy trying to excel at my job to worry about whether my uncle understood what I actually did for a living. But the comments kept coming. He told me I was too young to understand real national security, despite having never served a day in uniform himself. When I tried to discuss policy or strategy, he'd interrupt with patronizing explanations of how Washington really worked, as if my security clearance and operational experience were irrelevant compared to his attendance at interagency meetings. The worst part was how he framed my service as temporary. "This is good experience," he'd say, "but eventually you'll want to settle down, maybe work in the private sector where the real opportunities are." As if wearing the uniform was something I'd outgrow, like a college major I'd chosen on a whim. When my promotion to captain came through, he congratulated me with a warning. "Nice achievement, Katie, but don't get cocky. Captain is still pretty junior in the grand scheme of things." I remember standing in my parents' kitchen, holding the phone, feeling the sting of those words more than I wanted to admit. My father, a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, overheard and shook his head. He'd served 22 years, and he understood something my uncle never would. Rank isn't about ego, it's about responsibility. Every promotion meant more people depending on my judgment, more consequences if I failed. But my uncle didn't see it that way. To him, rank was status, and status was finite. If I was rising, someone else had to be falling, and he decided that someone was him. His circle of DC contacts only made it worse. He started spending time with mid-level political appointees and contractors, people who inflated each other's importance over expensive lunches paid for with government per diem. They treated proximity to power as if it were power itself, and my uncle absorbed that mindset completely. He got louder at family gatherings, more dismissive of anyone who questioned him, more territorial about anything related to government or security. And increasingly, he seemed bothered by my career progression in a way that went beyond normal family ribbing. I noticed how he'd change the subject when my mother bragged about my deployments. How he'd find ways to minimize my achievements. "Lots of people have security clearances these days," or "the military promotes everyone eventually." How he'd shift conversations away from my work and back to his own anecdotes about bureaucratic infighting that he somehow believed was more consequential than actual military operations. My mother noticed too. "He's just insecure," she told me once, trying to smooth things over the way she always did. "You know how he is about being important." I did know. That was the problem. The dynamic reached a turning point at a family barbecue the summer after my promotion. My uncle was holding court on the patio, telling a story about a briefing he'd attended at the State Department. When I mentioned that I'd just returned from a joint task force operation in the Middle East, he barely acknowledged it before launching into a long explanation of why civilian oversight of the military was so critical. "No offense, Katie," he said, gesturing with his beer, "but you guys execute. We provide the strategy." My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked uncomfortable. I just nodded and excused myself to help with the grill. Later, my father found me in the garage. "You don't have to put up with that." "It's fine," I said. "It's just Uncle Thomas being Uncle Thomas." "No," he said quietly. "It's not fine. And it's getting worse." He was right. What had started as dismissive comments had evolved into something more deliberate. My uncle wasn't just minimizing my career anymore, he was competing with it. Every conversation became a subtle contest, every family gathering another opportunity for him to assert dominance over a hierarchy that existed only in his mind. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my work, my squadron, my missions. What my uncle thought about my career was irrelevant to whether I could do my job effectively. But it did matter. Because even though I didn't realize it yet, he was already taking steps to make sure I didn't advance beyond where I was. And when I found out what he'd done, it would change everything between us. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in my office at Langley, reviewing intelligence reports before a briefing when my mentor, Colonel Elena Marquez, asked me to step into the hallway. "We need to talk," she said, her expression unreadable. "Not here." We walked to her car in the parking lot. She didn't start the engine, just turned to face me with the kind of careful composure that comes before bad news. "You've been selected for a classified intelligence rotation," she said. "High-level strategic work, exactly what you've been positioning yourself for." My heart jumped. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward for years, the kind of assignment that could define the rest of my career. "But there's a complication," Elena continued. "Someone raised concerns about your readiness. Informally, through back channels. Nothing official, nothing that goes in your file, but enough to slow down the approval process." "Who?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Elena hesitated. "A civilian liaison who identified himself as family. He didn't file a formal complaint, just made some calls to people he knows, suggesting you might be in over your head. Questioning whether someone your age should have access to material at this level." The words hit like a punch. Not because they could derail my career, Elena had already indicated the concerns were being dismissed as baseless, but because of what they revealed about my uncle's character. He hadn't just undermined me. He'd tried to sabotage me. "We're moving forward with your assignment," Elena said. His intervention had no real impact except to make him look petty. "But I thought you should know." I sat in silence, processing the betrayal. This wasn't a careless comment at a family dinner. This was deliberate action, taken behind my back, designed to damage my professional reputation with people who mattered. "Thank you for telling me," I finally said. Elena studied my face. "Are you okay?" I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. That night, I drove to my parents' house. My mother was surprised to see me. I hadn't announced I was coming. My father took one look at my expression and knew something was wrong. I told them what happened. My mother's face fell. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, her voice weak. "Thomas wouldn't," "He did," I said. "And he knew exactly what he was doing." My father's response was quieter but colder. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "It didn't work. My assignment is moving forward. But I needed you both to know who he really is." My mother tried to find explanations, excuses, reasons why my uncle might have acted out of misguided concern rather than malice. But even she couldn't make the pieces fit. There was no version of the story where his actions were protective rather than punitive. The next family event was Thanksgiving. My uncle showed up with his usual confident swagger, acting as if nothing had happened. He didn't know that I knew. Elena had made sure of that. She'd protected the source of my information to avoid creating an interagency incident. So when my uncle asked me how work was going, I smiled politely and said, "Really well, actually. I've been selected for a new intelligence rotation. High-level strategic work." His expression flickered, just for a second, before recovering. "That's great, kiddo. Just be careful. That kind of work can be intense." "I'm ready for it," I said, holding his gaze. He looked away first. After dinner, he cornered me in the hallway. "Listen, Katie, about your new assignment, if you need any advice on navigating the political side of things, I know people who can help." "I'm fine," I said. "My chain of command has been very supportive." "Still," he pressed, "it wouldn't hurt to have someone looking out for you. DC can be treacherous." I almost laughed. He was still trying to insert himself into my career, still trying to maintain some illusion of influence or control. As if his backroom complaints hadn't already proven exactly how little power he actually wielded. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I've got it covered." His jaw tightened. "You know, Katie, there's a right way and a wrong way to operate in this town. Experience matters. Relationships matter. So does integrity," I said quietly. The word hung between us. He knew. Maybe not the specifics, but he understood that something had shifted, that I saw him differently now. He recovered quickly, switching back to his jovial uncle persona. But the mask was cracked, and we both knew it. That night, driving home, I realized something I should have understood years ago. My uncle had never wanted me to fail. Failure would have been embarrassing for the family, and it would have reflected poorly on him by association. What he wanted was for me to stay small, successful enough to validate his early support, but never prominent enough to overshadow him. My growth threatened him. Not because I was doing anything to him, but because my rising profile highlighted his stagnation. Every promotion I earned reminded him that he'd spent decades in proximity to power without ever actually wielding any. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. It was about a man who'd built his identity on appearing important, watching someone he'd once called kiddo surpass him in ways he couldn't dismiss or explain away. And when he realized he couldn't control my trajectory, he tried to derail it. The clarity was painful but necessary. I couldn't keep making excuses for him. I couldn't keep pretending the relationship was salvageable. I had to let go of the uncle I thought I had and accept the man he actually was. My uncle Thomas Troy helped raise me. That's the part that makes this whole story hurt more than it should. When my father deployed, and he deployed often during my childhood, Uncle Thomas filled the gaps. School pickups when my mother worked double shifts at the hospital. Help with algebra homework. Advice about college applications. He was present in ways that mattered. He called me kiddo with affection back then, not condescension. He drove me to my Air Force Academy interview, helped me practice my responses, told me I was going to be someone important someday. When I got my acceptance letter, he took my parents and me out to dinner, picked up the check, and toasted to my future. The morning I left for basic officer training, he was there at 0400 hours, standing in my parents' driveway with coffee and donuts. "Go show them what you're made of," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Make us proud." I did. Through every phase of training, every assignment, every deployment, I thought about making him proud. Not just my parents, him too. Because he'd invested in me, believed in me, and I wanted to validate that investment. When I earned my commission as a second lieutenant, he attended the ceremony. When I made first lieutenant, he sent a congratulatory email. When I pinned on captain, he called with that cautionary congratulations, but he called. Looking back, I can see when the shift started. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like watching water slowly change temperature until you realize it's boiling. As a second lieutenant, 01, I was young, inexperienced, still learning. He could mentor me, guide me, maintain his role as the wise elder teaching the eager novice. When I made first lieutenant, 02, I was still figuring out how to lead airmen, still making rookie mistakes. He could laugh about it, tell stories about how everyone struggles at first. But at Captain 03, something changed. I wasn't a beginner anymore. I was leading teams, making real decisions, earning respect from senior officers. My security clearance gave me access to information he'd never see. My operational experience gave me credibility in circles where his civilian role carried no weight. And slowly, his pride turned conditional. He was proud when I stayed in my lane, when I talked about the challenges of leadership or the stress of deployments in ways that confirmed his assumptions about military life. But when I discussed strategy or policy or the intersection of intelligence and operations, he bristled. He wanted credit for my success without the discomfort of acknowledging that I'd grown beyond his understanding of what that success entailed. I remember the last time he gave me genuinely unqualified praise. I'd been selected for a special operations liaison assignment, and I called him excited to share the news. He congratulated me, asked good questions, seemed genuinely interested. But then he pivoted. "You know," he said, "if you ever want to transition to civilian work, I know people who could help you land something in defense contracting. Better pay, more stability, no deployments." "I like deploying," I said. "For now," he replied. "But you'll want different things eventually. Career, family, balance." There it was. The assumption that my commitment to service was temporary. That I'd eventually mature into wanting what he thought I should want. But I didn't. With every year, every assignment, every promotion, I became more certain that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. And with every year, my uncle became more invested in the idea that I was wrong. My mother tried to mediate. She'd always been the peacekeeper in the family, smoothing over conflicts, finding diplomatic middle ground. After particularly tense family gatherings, she'd call to debrief. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounds," she'd say. "He's just protective. You know how he is." I did know. That was becoming the problem. "He's proud of you," she'd insist. "He just has trouble expressing it." But pride isn't complicated. It's "I'm proud of you, period." Not "I'm proud of you, but." Not "I'm proud of you, however." When someone's pride comes with caveats, it's not really pride. It's tolerance for your success up to the point where it makes them uncomfortable. My father understood. He'd served as an enlisted airman for over 2 decades, retired as a master sergeant, and he knew the culture. He knew what it meant to lead, to serve, to subordinate your ego to the mission. "Your uncle never wore the uniform," my father said once. "He doesn't understand that rank isn't about status, it's about responsibility." He was right. My uncle saw rank as social capital, a measure of importance in the Washington hierarchy. He didn't understand that every promotion meant more people depending on my judgment, more consequences riding on my decisions, more responsibility for getting things right when the stakes were highest. To him, my O3 rank was a trophy. To me, it was a weight I carried every single day. By the time he tried to sabotage my intelligence rotation, the relationship was already fractured. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Part of me still wanted to believe we could get back to what we'd been, uncle and niece, mentor and mentee, family who genuinely celebrated each other's successes. But we couldn't. Because the person I remembered, the uncle who drove me to my academy interview and believed I'd be someone important, wasn't gone. He just never existed in the way I thought he did. His support had always been conditional on my remaining someone he could feel superior to. The moment I outgrew that role, his support evaporated. And that realization, that the man who'd helped shape my dreams couldn't handle seeing those dreams realized, was what hurt most. Not the sabotage itself, but the understanding that it was inevitable. That there was no version of my success he could genuinely celebrate, because my success reminded him of everything he'd failed to become. I grieved the relationship in stages. First, denial. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Then anger, how could he do this? Then bargaining, maybe if I explained myself better, he'd understand. Then depression, mourning the uncle I thought I had. But acceptance? That took longer. Because accepting meant acknowledging that I'd lost someone who'd never really been on my side. And that meant rewriting years of memories, reinterpreting moments I'd cherished, recognizing manipulation in places I'd seen mentorship. It meant growing up in a way I hadn't expected to at 32. And it meant moving forward without him, even though part of me still wanted to make him proud. After I found out what my uncle had done, I didn't confront him. I didn't send angry texts or make scenes at family dinners. I simply withdrew. Not dramatically, just gradually, quietly, creating distance that I should have established years earlier. I stopped calling to update him on my career. Stopped seeking his advice on assignments. Stopped treating him like someone whose opinion mattered in decisions that would shape my future. The withdrawal was strategic, not emotional. I'd spent enough time and intelligence to understand that information is power, and I'd been handing him ammunition he was willing to use against me. So I stopped. The change was subtle enough that it took him weeks to notice. When he finally did, his response was predictable. A text, "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I replied politely. "Everything's fine. Just busy with work." "Too busy to call your uncle?" The guilt trip was transparent, but part of me still felt it. Years of conditioning don't disappear because you understand the manipulation intellectually. "I'll call when I can," I wrote back. I didn't. My promotion to Major, 04, came through that spring. I was 34, right on track for normal career progression. The promotion ceremony was small, just my squadron leadership and a few close colleagues. My parents attended. I didn't tell my uncle until after. He texted congratulations 12 hours later. "Nice work on the promotion. Major's a good rank." Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "Congratulations on this achievement." Just a clinical acknowledgement that felt more obligatory than genuine. I thanked him and let the conversation die. At family events, the dynamic shifted noticeably. Where he used to dominate conversations about government and policy, he now avoided those topics when I was present. He'd start to say something, see me, and pivot to safer subjects: sports, weather, local news. My mother noticed. "You two seem distant," she said carefully. "We're fine," I replied. Which was technically true. We weren't fighting. We just weren't close. "He asks about you," she offered. "Wants to know how you're doing." He can ask me directly. "Katie, Mom, I'm not angry. But I'm also not going to pretend everything's normal." He knows what he did. Until he acknowledges it, we're going to stay exactly where we are. She didn't push. My mother was conflict-averse, but she wasn't blind. She'd seen enough to understand that this wasn't teenage stubbornness, it was adult boundary setting. My father's response was simpler. "Good," he said when I told him I'd stopped updating my uncle on work matters. "You don't owe him access to your life." The distance created space for me to see patterns I'd missed before. How my uncle always shifted conversations back to himself. How he name-dropped contacts and meetings to maintain an illusion of importance. How he diminished other people's achievements while inflating his own. It wasn't just me. It was everyone. He did it to my mother when she talked about her work as a school administrator. He did it to my father when he mentioned his military service. He did it to cousins, neighbors, colleagues, anyone whose success might outshine his own. I'd been too close to see it clearly. Distance provided clarity. Major David Chin, a fellow intelligence officer and one of my closest colleagues, noticed the shift in me during a joint operation briefing. Afterward, over coffee, he asked if everything was okay. "Family stuff," I said. "Want to talk about it?" I gave him the abbreviated version. Uncle who couldn't handle my career progression, who'd tried to undermine me, who I was now keeping at arm's length. David listened, then shared his own experience with a father who'd wanted him to be a doctor, not a military officer. "Some people can't separate your choices from their ego," he said. "They take your independence as rejection." That framing helped. My uncle's behavior wasn't about my choices being wrong, it was about his inability to accept choices he hadn't made for me. The months passed. I deployed twice, once to the Middle East, once to the Pacific. My work deepened. My responsibilities expanded. My reputation within the intelligence community grew. My uncle learned about these developments through my mother, not from me. According to her, he'd ask questions. "Where is she now? What's she working on? Is she staying safe?" But he never asked me directly. And I never volunteered the information. The boundary I'd established was clear. If he wanted to be part of my life, he needed to acknowledge what he'd done and demonstrate genuine change. Not performative apologies, real accountability. That accountability never came. Instead, he lingered at the periphery. Present enough to maintain the appearance of family connection, absent enough to avoid real confrontation. It was uncomfortable for my mother, who wanted everyone to get along. It was infuriating for my father, who thought my uncle deserved to be cut off completely. For me, It was simply necessary. I couldn't control his behavior. I could only control my response to it. So I chose distance. I chose protection. I chose to invest my emotional energy in relationships that were reciprocal and genuine, not performative and conditional. And gradually, the anger faded. Not because I forgave him. Forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and he'd never provided that. But because I stopped expecting him to be different than he was. He was insecure, territorial, and threatened by my success. Those were facts about who he was, not problems I needed to solve. My job wasn't to manage his ego. It was to serve my country, lead my teams, and execute my missions with competence and integrity. Everything else was secondary. By the time I pinned on Lieutenant Colonel at 38, the distance between my uncle and me had calcified into permanence. We were family in name, strangers in substance. And I'd made peace with that. Because sometimes the people who help you start your journey aren't meant to be there when you reach your destination. Sometimes growing up means outgrowing the people who can't grow with you. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to let the relationship be what it is rather than what you wish it were. The promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, 05, felt different than the others. Maybe because I'd spent 5 years as a major, had commanded at the squadron level, had deployed multiple times, had earned every bit of credibility that came with the rank. Or maybe because I was 38 now, and the weight of leadership had shaped me into someone I barely recognized from my academy days. The ceremony was larger this time, formal, with senior officers from multiple branches attending. My work had moved beyond Air Force-specific assignments into joint operations and interagency coordination. My name circulated in circles that mattered, not for politics or self-promotion, but because I'd built a reputation for calm judgment and meticulous analysis. My parents were there. My uncle was not. He'd received an invitation, my mother had made sure of it. But he declined with a vague excuse about a scheduling conflict that we all knew was fabricated. "He's proud of you," my mother said afterward, trying to salvage something from his absence. "He's just uncomfortable," I finished. "I know." She didn't argue. What could she say? The evidence was overwhelming by now. Years of distance, minimal contact, his inability to simply show up and be happy for me. My father's response was more direct. His loss, he said, adjusting the new rank insignia on my shoulders with care. He could have been part of this. He chose not to be. Within weeks of the promotion, I received orders for a temporary assignment supporting White House national security systems coordination. Not a political appointment, nothing glamorous or public-facing. Just precise, sensitive work requiring someone with extensive intelligence experience and the discretion not to misuse access. The assignment would last 6 months, involve daily work at the White House complex, and require coordination across multiple agencies. It was exactly the kind of role I'd been building toward, combining technical expertise with strategic oversight. My mother mentioned it to extended family. Somehow, word reached my uncle. He called me for the first time in 8 months. "Heard about your White House assignment. That's impressive. Thank you. Are you ready for that level of exposure? It's a completely different environment than military operations." There it was again. The assumption that I couldn't handle something he'd never done himself. "I'm ready," I said simply. "You know, if you need any guidance on navigating Washington politics, I'm good, Thomas." But I appreciate the offer. The use of his first name instead of Uncle Thomas wasn't accidental. He noticed. The conversation ended shortly after. Later, my mother called. "He's worried about you. He thinks the White House assignment might be too high profile, that it could draw unwanted attention." "He's not worried about me," I said. "He's uncomfortable with what the assignment represents." Which is that I'm operating in spaces he thought belonged to him. My mother sighed. She couldn't dispute it anymore. The first day of my White House assignment was scheduled for a Monday in September. Standard security processing, orientation briefings, facility access setup, routine but essential. What wasn't routine was discovering that my uncle would be at the White House the same day. Pure coincidence. He was escorting a minor official he'd worked with, some mid-level appointee who needed guidance navigating the West Wing. My uncle, in his perpetual quest to appear important, had volunteered to help. We arrived within minutes of each other. I saw him first, standing near the security checkpoint, adjusting his tie, looking nervous in the way civilians do when they're trying to project authority in unfamiliar territory. He saw me approach and his expression shifted surprise, then something harder. "Katie?" He stepped toward me. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said. "Starting today." "You work here?" "For the next 6 months, yes." He processed this information visibly. "In what capacity?" "Security advisor. Intelligence coordination." His jaw tightened. You're assigned to the White House?" "As an O5. "That's correct." The official he was escorting appeared, interrupting. My uncle introduced me awkwardly. "This is my niece, she's also here today," before moving toward the visitor entrance. I headed toward the staff entrance. Different access levels, different security protocols. And that's when it happened. My uncle noticed where I was walking. His voice rang out across the security area, sharp and commanding. "You can't go in there." I stopped, turned back. Several people paused, looking between us. "Excuse me." He gestured at the secured entrance I was approaching. "That's for the president's cabinet and senior advisors. You need to use the visitor entrance." His tone wasn't concerned. It was corrective, embarrassing, the kind of public reprimand designed to put someone in their place. The security officer at the checkpoint looked uncomfortable. I walked calmly to the biometric scanner at the secured entrance. No argument, no explanation. I simply placed my hand on the device. The screen illuminated green. "Access granted. Security advisor, O5 authorization." The mechanical voice was neutral, but in the sudden silence of the security area, it felt definitive. My uncle stood frozen. The official he was escorting looked confused. The security officer relaxed, nodding me through. I heard something hit the marble floor, my uncle's briefcase, fallen from his hand. I didn't turn around. I walked forward, through the secured entrance and into the West Wing hallway. Behind me, I heard the security officer explaining to my uncle that visitor access was to the right, that he'd need to wait for his escort's clearance to be processed, that the entrance I'd used was restricted to permanent staff and senior advisors. I kept walking. Past offices, past conference rooms, past portraits of former officials, toward the wing where my workspace had been assigned. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. But something inside me had fundamentally shifted. For years, my uncle had tried to make me small. To minimize my achievements, question my readiness, imply that I didn't belong in spaces where real decisions were made. And for years, part of me had internalized that doubt. Not consciously, but in the small ways I'd overprepared for briefings, second-guessed my analysis, worried that maybe he was right, maybe I was in over my head. But I wasn't. The green light on the scanner proved it. The rank insignia on my shoulders proved it. The missions I'd flown, the operations I'd coordinated, the teams I'd led, all of it proved it. I belonged here. Not because of connections or politics or luck, but because I'd earned it through years of confidence, judgment, and service. My uncle's opinion about my readiness was irrelevant. It always had been. Later that afternoon, my mother called. "Thomas said he ran into you at the White House." We crossed paths. He seemed shaken. "Said you have some kind of senior access?" "I do." "He didn't realize your assignment was at that level." "Most people don't. It's not the kind of thing I advertise." She was quiet for a moment. "He feels foolish. He tried to correct you in front of security, and I did my job, Mom. I went where I was supposed to go. That's all." "I know. He's having a hard time with this." "That's not my problem to solve." The words came out more firmly than I intended, but they were true. My uncle's discomfort with my success wasn't something I needed to manage or minimize. He'd spent years trying to keep me in a box, and I'd finally stopped cooperating. "You're right," my mother said softly. "You're absolutely right." That evening, sitting in the temporary housing assigned to me for the duration of my White House rotation, I thought about the moment at the scanner. Not with satisfaction or triumph, but with something quieter, relief. Relief that I'd stopped shrinking for someone else's comfort. Relief that I'd trusted my own path even when someone I loved tried to redirect it. Relief that the girl who'd left for the academy at 18 had grown into a woman who could walk through the doors she'd earned without permission or apology. My uncle had yelled, "You can't go in there." But I could. And I did. And the screen turned green. The 6 months at the White House changed me in ways I didn't anticipate. Not because of the work itself, intelligence coordination, threat assessment, interagency communication, but because of the environment. Every day, I walked through doors that required clearance most people would never have. Every day, I sat in rooms where decisions with global consequences were made. And every day, I proved to myself that I belonged there. My uncle never contacted me during that period. Not once. My mother said he'd ask about me occasionally, but always in vague terms. "How's Katie doing?" Not, "How's her assignment going?" or "Is she handling the pressure?" Just surface-level inquiries that required surface-level answers. Meanwhile, I was operating at a level he'd spent his entire career trying to reach. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't dwell on it. I had work to do. Colonel Elena Marquez visited once, observing a briefing I was leading for a multi-agency task force. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "You've grown into this," she said. "Not just the rank, the presence. You command a room now." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm putting your name forward for something. Can't discuss details yet, but it's the kind of opportunity that comes once in a career. Be ready." I was ready. I'd been ready for years. The assignment concluded in March. My performance reviews were exceptional, clinical language that translated to exceeded expectations at every level. I returned to my home station with a letter of commendation and a reputation that had expanded beyond Air Force circles into the broader national security community. My promotion to Colonel 06 came through that summer. I was 40, which put me slightly ahead of the typical timeline, but not unusually so. The ceremony was formal, attended by senior leadership from multiple branches. My parents were there. My uncle was not. This time, he didn't even respond to the invitation. No excuse, no explanation. Just silence. My mother tried to soften it. "He's dealing with some things right now. Work stress, I think." I didn't ask what kind of stress. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd reached a level of leadership that required me to focus on the people who depended on me, my subordinates, my peers, my commanders. I couldn't afford to spend emotional energy on someone who'd repeatedly demonstrated he couldn't be happy for my success. So I stopped expecting him to be. The work intensified after my promotion. I took command of a joint intelligence unit, oversaw operations across 3 continents, and spent more time deployed than stateside. The responsibility was immense, but I'd been preparing for it my entire career. Major David Chin, now Lieutenant Colonel Chin, served as my deputy. Over coffee during a rare break between operations, he asked about my family. "Fine," I said. "Mostly." "The uncle?" Radio silence for over a year now. David nodded. "Some people can't handle being eclipsed. It's not personal, it's their insecurity." "I know. Doesn't make it less disappointing." "No," he agreed. "But disappointment is better than resentment. You've moved past resenting him, right?" I thought about it. "Yes. I think I have." "Then you're free." He was right. The anger had faded, replaced by something closer to acceptance. My uncle was who he was. I couldn't change that. I could only control how much space I gave him in my life. And I'd chosen to give him very little. The following year brought another shift. I was selected for the National War College, a year-long program for senior officers being groomed for strategic leadership positions. The selection was competitive, the curriculum was rigorous, and the implications for my career were significant. My father called to congratulate me. War College. That's the pathway to the stars, Katie. He meant it literally. Officers who completed War College often went on to flag rank Brigadier General 07 and beyond. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was a signal that senior leadership saw potential for higher command. "It's just another school, Dad." "No," he said firmly. "It's not. And you know it." I didn't know it. But I'd learned not to celebrate too early, not to assume anything was certain until it actually happened. During my time at War College, I heard through extended family that my uncle had taken a new position, lateral move, same pay grade, different office. My mother framed it as a positive development, but I recognized it for what it was: stagnation dressed up as choice. He'd reached his ceiling. Not because he lacked intelligence or capability, but because he'd spent years cultivating the appearance of importance rather than building genuine expertise. In Washington, that strategy works up to a point. Beyond that point, substance matters more than performance. I didn't take satisfaction in his stagnation. But I didn't feel guilty about my progression either. We were on different paths. We'd been on different paths for years. The divergence was simply becoming more visible. After War College, I returned to operational command. The pace was relentless: briefings, deployments, crisis response, strategic planning. I was responsible for intelligence operations that directly informed national security decisions. The weight of that responsibility never lightened, but I'd learned to carry it. Then came the call from Elena, now a brigadier general. "Katie, we need to talk." Secure line. I moved to a classified space and called her back. "You're being considered for something significant," she said. "White House assignment, permanent this time. National Security Council staff. You'd be the senior military intelligence advisor to the president's team." My heart rate increased, but my voice stayed steady. "What's the timeline?" "Fast. They need someone yesterday." "Your name came up immediately: your previous White House work, your operational experience, your reputation for keeping your mouth shut, and your analysis sharp. What do I need to do?" "Say yes. Then prepare for the most intense vetting process of your life." I said yes. The vetting took 3 months. Background investigations, security interviews, psychological assessments, reviews of every decision I'd made in uniform. They examined my finances, my relationships, my social media presence, everything. I passed. The official notification came in November. I'd be starting in January, reporting directly to the National Security Advisor, coordinating intelligence input across all military branches and civilian agencies. It was the kind of position that ended careers if you failed and launched them if you succeeded. My parents were ecstatic. My father, especially, understood what this meant. "They're grooming you for flag rank," he said. "This is the final proving ground." My mother asked the question I knew was coming. "Are you going to tell Thomas?" "No. Katie, Mom, he made his choice. Years ago. I'm not going to chase his approval anymore." She didn't push. She'd finally accepted that the relationship was beyond repair. But word travels in Washington, especially about senior appointments. Within days of the public announcement, a brief press release listing new NSC staff, my uncle knew. He sent a text. The first direct communication in almost 2 years. Saw the news. "Congratulations. This is a big deal." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to respond with all the hurt and anger I'd been carrying. Instead, I wrote back, "Thank you." Nothing more. No invitation to reconnect, no opening for further conversation. Just acknowledgement. He replied, "We should talk sometime. Catch up." I didn't respond. Because catch up implied we were equals who'd simply lost touch. But we weren't equals, and we hadn't lost touch. He'd driven me away, and I'd let him go. There was nothing to catch up on. Nothing to repair. We'd become strangers who shared DNA and a complicated history, but no present and no future. And I'd made peace with that. The weeks leading up to my White House start date passed quickly. I completed transition briefings, handed off my current command, relocated to Washington. The logistics were complex, but I'd managed more difficult transitions during combat deployments. What I wasn't prepared for, what I couldn't have anticipated, was discovering that my uncle would be at the White House on my first day. Complete coincidence. Or perhaps inevitability, given how small certain Washington circles actually are. He was escorting someone, a minor appointee, from what I gathered. Playing tour guide, trying to seem important by association. I arrived early, 0600 hours, wanting to complete security processing before the building filled with staff. The West Wing at dawn was quiet, almost peaceful. Security personnel moved efficiently through their protocols, and I moved through mine. Then I heard his voice. Loud, echoing off marble floors. "Katie?" I turned. He was standing near the visitor's entrance, shock written across his face. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said simply. "You work here?" "At the White House." "Starting today, yes." He looked me up and down, taking in my uniform, my rank insignia, trying to process what my presence meant. "In what capacity?" The question came out sharper than he probably intended, revealing the insecurity underneath. "National Security Council. Senior Military Intelligence Advisor." The words landed like physical blows. I watched him struggle to maintain composure, to find some response that wouldn't reveal how much this information destabilized him. "That's impressive," he finally managed. "Very impressive." "Thank you." The appointee he was escorting appeared, interrupting. My uncle introduced me awkwardly. "This is my niece, Colonel Troy. She apparently works here too," his voice tight with something between pride and resentment. I exchanged pleasantries with the appointee, then excused myself to complete my security processing. As I walked toward the staff entrance, the secured corridor that led to the West Wing offices, I heard my uncle call out, "You can't go in there." I stopped. Several people in the security area paused, turning to look. I faced him. "Excuse me." He gestured at the secured entrance, his voice rising with the kind of false authority people use when they're desperate to be right. "That's for the president's cabinet. Senior advisors only. You need to use the visitor entrance." His tone wasn't helpful. It was corrective, patronizing, designed to put me in my place in front of witnesses. The security officer at the checkpoint looked between us, uncertain how to respond. I could have argued, could have explained, could have made a scene. Instead, I simply walked to the biometric scanner and placed my hand on the screen. The system processed for 2 seconds that felt longer. Then, green light. "Access granted, Security Advisor, 06 authorization." The mechanical voice was emotionless, but in the sudden silence of the security area, it carried the weight of absolute authority. My uncle's briefcase hit the floor. The sound echoed, leather on marble, loud in the quiet. I didn't turn around. I walked forward, through the secured entrance, into the West Wing. Behind me, I heard the security officer explaining to my uncle that the entrance I'd used was restricted to permanent NSC staff and cabinet-level advisors. That visitor access was to the right. That he'd need to wait for his escort's clearance to be processed. I kept walking. Past the Roosevelt Room. Past offices belonging to people whose names appeared in newspapers. Past conference rooms where decisions affecting millions of lives were made daily. I walked to my assigned workspace, a small office with a window overlooking the north lawn, a secure computer terminal, and a nameplate that read COL, Catherine Troy, USAF. I sat down at my desk, logged into the classified system, began reviewing the morning's intelligence briefs, and for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt completely, unquestionably certain that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because of my uncle's shock. Not because of the rank insignia on my shoulders. Not because of the prestigious address of my workplace. But because I'd spent 2 decades earning the right to walk through that door. Through sacrifice, discipline, competence, and integrity. Through deployments that took me away from family. Through decisions that kept me awake at night. Through leadership that required me to be better than I thought I could be. The green light wasn't a victory over my uncle. It was confirmation of something I'd always known but had sometimes doubted. I belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thomas just called. He sounds upset." "What happened?" I typed back, "Nothing important. I'll call you later." Because it truly wasn't important. My uncle's discomfort, his shock, his inability to reconcile the person I'd become with the person he'd tried to keep me as none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the intelligence brief in front of me. The meeting scheduled for 0900 hours. The critical analysis due by end of day. The responsibility I'd accepted and the mission I'd sworn to execute. That evening, back in my temporary apartment, I reflected on the day. Not on the confrontation at security. That was a footnote, a moment that would fade. I thought instead about the journey. About the young captain who'd brushed off her uncle's dismissive comments because she didn't want to make problems. About the major who'd discovered betrayal and chosen distance over confrontation. About the lieutenant colonel who'd stopped seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it freely. And about the colonel who'd walked through a door she'd earned, past someone who'd tried to block her path, into a role she was genuinely qualified to fill. 25 years is a long time in the military. Long enough to see administrations change, strategies evolve, and entire generations of officers rise through the ranks. Long enough to deploy more times than you can count, to lead operations you'll never be able to discuss, and to make decisions that keep you awake decades later. Long enough to become someone you barely recognize from the colonel who walked through that White House door at 40. I'm 65 now. Vice Admiral Catherine Troy, 09, United States Air Force. 3 stars on my shoulders, each one representing a level of responsibility I couldn't have imagined as a young captain. I've commanded at every level, served in combat zones across 4 continents, and spent the last 8 years as the Deputy Commander of Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. Retirement is 3 months away. The date is set, the ceremony is planned, and I've already started the strange process of imagining life without a uniform. My father passed away 6 years ago. Complications from a stroke, quick and mostly painless, which is all you can really hope for at 87. He died proud, surrounded by family, his service medals displayed on the hospice room wall alongside photos of me in uniform at various ranks. His last coherent words to me were, "You did good, kiddo. Better than good." My mother is 83 now, living in a senior community in Virginia, sharp as ever despite the walker and the hearing aids. She gardens, plays bridge, and FaceTimes me every Sunday morning without fail. We talk about everything except my uncle. That topic died years ago, buried under the weight of time and chosen irrelevance. I haven't spoken to Thomas Troy in 23 years. Not since that morning at the White House when the scanner turned green and his briefcase hit the floor. He tried to reach out a few times in the years immediately after awkward emails, messages passed through my mother, a card on my promotion to brigadier general that I never acknowledged. Eventually, he stopped trying. And I stopped thinking about him, except in those rare quiet moments when I wonder about roads not taken and relationships that couldn't survive growth. I heard through extended family that he retired from government service 15 years ago. Took a consulting position that lasted 3 years before he fully retired. Moved to Arizona with his second wife, a marriage my mother attended, but I did not. Lives comfortably on his pension and investments, plays golf, travels occasionally. By all accounts, he's content. Or at least, he's made peace with the life he chose. I'm glad for that. Not because I've forgiven him, forgiveness requires a conversation we've never had, but because carrying anger for 25 years would have corroded something essential in me. I learned long ago that you can release someone from your life without releasing them from your heart's sharp edges. You can simply let them become part of your past without poisoning your present. The ceremony is in October. A full military retirement, complete with all the traditions that accompany 3 decades of service. My mother will be there, obviously. My closest colleagues, the officers I've mentored, the senior leadership who've shaped the last phase of my career. The vice president is scheduled to attend. I've briefed her multiple times over the years, and she insisted on being present. What I didn't expect was the email that arrived 6 weeks before the ceremony. The subject line read, "Retirement Ceremony Attendance, Thomas Troy." My assistant had forwarded it with a note, "Not sure how to respond to this." "Your call, ma'am." I opened it with the clinical detachment I'd perfected over decades of reading intelligence reports on subjects I'd rather not think about. "Dear Katie," it began. Not Colonel, not Admiral. Katie. As if we'd spoken last week rather than 2 decades ago. "I heard about your upcoming retirement from your mother. Congratulations on an extraordinary career. I know we haven't been in touch, and that's entirely my fault. I'd like to attend your ceremony if you're comfortable with that. I understand if you're not. But I wanted to ask. You deserved better from me than what you got, and I'd like the chance to say that in person if you'll allow it. Respectfully, Thomas." I read it 3 times. Showed it to no one. Sat with it for 2 days. The easy answer was no. He'd lost the right to witness my milestones years ago. His presence would be uncomfortable, potentially disruptive, certainly complicated. But something about the email felt different than his previous attempts at contact. The acknowledgement of fault. The lack of excuses or justifications. The simple request rather than presumed entitlement. I drafted 4 different responses before settling on the truth: you can attend. The ceremony is public. But I won't have time for private conversation that day. If you want to talk, it needs to be before. His response came within hours. I understand. I'm available whenever works for you. I can come to DC. We scheduled a meeting for a Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop near the Pentagon. Neutral ground, public space, with a clear endpoint. I had a meeting at 1500 hours, which gave us exactly 45 minutes. I arrived first, ordered coffee, chose a table near the back where we'd have some privacy, but not isolation. I was in uniform, 3 stars clearly visible, the weight of rank and accomplishment impossible to ignore. He arrived precisely on time. And the first thing that struck me was how old he looked. Not just older, old. He was 81 now, 20 years my senior, and those years showed in ways I hadn't anticipated. Thinner than I remembered, moving carefully, his face marked with lines that spoke of worry and age rather than laughter. His civilian clothes, khakis, and a polo shirt seemed too large, as if he'd recently lost weight. He saw me and stopped. Just for a second. Taking in the stars, the uniform, the reality of who I'd become. Then he walked over. Katie, thank you for agreeing to this. Thomas. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He did, slowly. We sat in silence for a moment, the chasm of 23 years between us. You look well, he finally said. The rank suits you. Thank you. Vice Admiral. That's... I don't even know what to say. It's extraordinary. I didn't respond. Compliments from him felt empty after so much absence. He seemed to understand that. He cleared his throat. I'm not good at this. Apologies, accountability, any of it. Spent most of my life avoiding exactly this kind of conversation. I noticed. He nodded, accepting that. I was threatened by you. From the moment you started succeeding in ways I never could, I felt diminished. And instead of being proud, instead of celebrating you, I tried to contain you. To keep you small enough that I could still feel big. The honesty surprised me. Why? Because my entire identity was built on being important. Or appearing important, which isn't the same thing, but I couldn't see the difference. You actually were important. You actually did things that mattered. And that terrified me because it highlighted everything I wasn't. I sipped my coffee, processing. So you try to sabotage my career. Yes. And I'm sorry. That apology is 25 years late, but it's genuine. Why no? He smiled sadly. Because I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed 8 months ago. I've got maybe 6 months left, probably less. The words should have hit harder. Should have generated sympathy or sadness or something warmer than the clinical acknowledgement I actually felt. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I'm not cruel. But the grief I might have felt for the uncle who drove me to my academy interview had died years ago. This man was a stranger who happened to share my history. I'm not telling you for sympathy, he said quickly. I'm telling you because it clarified things. When you're facing the end, all the ego and competition and bullshit just evaporates. And you're left with the truth of who you were and what you did. And what truth did you find? That I wasted a lot of energy on resentment. That I hurt people who didn't deserve it. That I let pride destroy a relationship with someone I genuinely loved. His voice cracked slightly. You were like a daughter to me, Katie. And I ruined that because I couldn't handle you being better than me. 23 years ago, those words would have broken something open in me. Would have released tears, or rage, or some combination of both. Now, they just settled into the quiet space where my feelings about him used to live. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. And I accept your apology. But I need you to understand something. The person you hurt, that captain, that major who desperately wanted your approval, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not her. Haven't been for a very long time. I know. I've had a good career. A great career, actually. I've led thousands of airmen, made decisions that saved lives, served my country with everything I had. And I did all of that without you. Not to spite you, You just weren't relevant to any of it. He flinched but nodded. As it should be. I don't carry anger about what happened. But I also don't carry hope for reconciliation. Too much time has passed. Too much damage was done. I understand. You can come to the ceremony. But as an observer, not as family. I won't introduce you, won't acknowledge you beyond common courtesy. And after the ceremony, we go back to our separate lives. That's more than I deserve, he said quietly. We sat in silence for another moment. Then he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, I've followed your career. Your mother sends updates, whether I ask or not. I know about your deployments, your commands, the missions you can't talk about, but that she hints at with so much pride. I know you've briefed presidents, testified before Congress, shaped strategy at the highest levels. He looked down at his coffee cup. And every time I hear about another promotion, another achievement, part of me is devastated that I'm not part of it. But another part, the part that used to love you before I let ego poison everything, that part is genuinely, overwhelmingly proud. Thank you, I said. Because what else do you say to a dying man's confession? I know it doesn't change anything. But I wanted you to know that the uncle who drove you to the academy, who believed you'd be someone important, he's still in here somewhere. He's just buried under years of insecurity and mistakes. I checked my watch. 13:45. 15 minutes until I needed to leave. I need to ask you something, I said. When you tried to block me at the White House, when you told me I couldn't go through that door, what did you think would happen? He looked pained. Honestly? I think I hoped you'd be embarrassed. Humbled. Put in your place in a way that would make me feel better about myself. He shook his head. It sounds monstrous saying it out loud. It was monstrous. Yes, it was. And when the scanner turned green, I wanted to disappear. To have never been there. The look on your face, it wasn't triumph, Katie. It was disappointment. Like you'd finally, completely given up on me. And you had every right to. I stood, gathering my things. He stood too, more slowly. I hope the rest of your time is peaceful, I said. I mean that. Thank you. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was weak, his hand cold. I'll see you at the ceremony, I said. Goodbye, Thomas. Goodbye, Katie. And congratulations. On everything. I walked out of the coffee shop and back into my life, a life he'd never really been part of, despite the years and the shared history. The retirement ceremony was everything a military send-off should be. Perfect October weather, crisp and clear. The parade ground at Joint Base Andrews filled with officers, enlisted personnel, family, and friends. A band played service anthems. The color guard presented flags with precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. The vice president spoke about my service, my leadership, my contributions to national security. My successor as deputy commander spoke about my mentorship. A three-star Army general I'd worked with during joint operations spoke about my strategic vision and calm under pressure. My mother sat in the front row, crying openly, flanked by cousins and old family friends. Behind her, scattered through the audience, I recognized faces from every phase of my career. Officers I'd served with as a captain. Colleagues from my White House years. Airmen I'd commanded who'd sought me out to attend. And in the back, sitting alone, was Thomas Troy. I saw him once, briefly, when I scanned the crowd during the opening remarks. He wasn't crying, but his expression was complicated grief, pride, regret, all mixed together in a way that probably hurt to hold. I didn't acknowledge him. Not out of cruelty, but because this ceremony wasn't about him. It never had been. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about service. About the privilege of leading airmen who trusted me with their careers and sometimes their lives. About the weight of decisions made in crisis. About the honor of wearing the uniform for 32 years. I thanked my parents, my father, though he couldn't be there, and my mother, who'd supported every deployment and celebrated every achievement. I thanked mentors who'd shaped my understanding of leadership. I thanked the airmen who'd executed missions with competence and courage. I didn't thank anyone who'd tried to hold me back. There was no place for that in this moment. The final tradition, the retirement of my flag. 3 stars on blue fabric, folded with military precision, presented to me by the current Air Force Chief of Staff. As I accepted it, I thought about the young captain who'd brushed off dismissive comments to keep peace. The major who'd discovered betrayal and chosen distance. The lieutenant colonel who'd stopped seeking approval she didn't need. The colonel who'd walked through a door she'd earned. And the vice admiral who'd built a career defined not by the obstacles others created, but by the mission she'd committed to serve. The ceremony ended. People flooded forward, handshakes, hugs, congratulations, promises to stay in touch. My mother reached me first, gripping my hands. Your father would have burst with pride today. I know, Mom. He always knew you'd go far. Further than anyone imagined. Over her shoulder, I saw Thomas waiting at the edge of the crowd. Not approaching, just standing there, present but not intrusive. My mother followed my gaze and tensed. Do you want me to? It's fine, I said. He can stay. Eventually, the crowd thinned enough that he approached. He looked friendlier than he had at the coffee shop 2 weeks earlier. The cancer was progressing quickly. Congratulations, Admiral, he said formally. It was a beautiful ceremony. Thank you. We stood awkwardly. My mother looked between us, uncertain. I won't keep you, he said. I just wanted to say goodbye. And to tell you one more time, I'm proud of you. I should have said it more. Should have shown it better. But I am. I appreciate that. He nodded, turned to leave, then paused. The world is better because you served. That's not nothing. No, I agreed. It's not. He walked away slowly, disappearing into the dispersing crowd. I watched him go, feeling nothing but a kind of gentle closure. Not forgiveness. That would require more than a deathbed apology and a ceremony attendance. But acceptance. He'd been part of my story, and now that chapter was finished. My mother squeezed my arm. Are you okay? Yes, I said. And I was. Thomas Troy died 7 weeks later. Hospice care in Arizona, his wife and stepchildren present. My mother called to tell me. I sent flowers to the funeral but didn't attend. She didn't ask me to. She understood. At the memorial service, which I learned about secondhand, his eulogy apparently mentioned me. His niece, Vice Admiral Catherine Troy, a woman he was immensely proud of even though he didn't always show it well. It was a kind revision of history. But I let it stand. The dead deserve some grace, and the living deserve peace. I'm 70 now. 5 years into retirement, living in Colorado, consulting occasionally on intelligence matters, but mostly hiking, reading, and enjoying the quiet that comes after decades of operational tempo. I think about my career sometimes not with regret, but with satisfaction. I served well. I led well. I made mistakes, but I learned from them. I left the Air Force better than I found it. And I think about my uncle occasionally. Not with anger anymore. Not even with disappointment. Just with the clear-eyed understanding that some relationships can't survive the gap between who someone needs you to be and who you actually are. He needed me to stay small. I needed to grow. Those two needs were incompatible, and no amount of family history could bridge that divide. The last time I visited my mother, now 93, in assisted living but still sharp, she showed me a box of old photos. Pictures from my academy days, my early assignments, promotion ceremonies. And one photo of me at 5 years old, sitting on Uncle Thomas's shoulders at a family picnic, both of us laughing at something off camera. He loved you, you know, my mother said softly. Before everything went wrong. He really did love you. I know, Mom. Do you wish things had been different? I thought about it honestly. No. What happened made me who I am. It taught me important things about boundaries, about whose voices to listen to, about the difference between support and control. But it still hurt. Yes, it hurt. But I survived it. And I'm grateful for that too. She nodded, closing the photo album. He was so proud at the end, you know. Even though he didn't know how to say it properly. I know, I said again. Because I did know. His apology had been real, even if it couldn't repair what was broken. Sometimes the doors you're told you can't enter become the ones that define your entire life. Sometimes the people who try to hold you back end up proving exactly how strong you've become. And sometimes the greatest gift someone gives you is showing you clearly who they are, so you can decide clearly who you need to be without them. I walked through that door 25 years ago. The screen turned green, and I kept walking through rooms and roles and responsibilities that shaped me into someone I'm proud of becoming. My uncle saw that moment as a humiliation. I saw it as liberation. And in the end, that difference in perspective told the whole story. And that's how one moment at the White House made everything crystal clear, not just about my uncle, but about myself. Sometimes the people closest to us aren't threatened by our failures, they're threatened by our growth. Have you ever had someone try to hold you back because they couldn't handle who you were becoming? Did you confront them, or did you walk away quietly? And if you were in my shoes, would you have handled that moment any differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their success doesn't need anyone's permission.